My work has been based on the observation that in most organizations, the documentation is awful.
Hmm.
As a result of that, the governance and compliance activities are at risk. They're challenged because governance compliance rely on good definitions of what the organization is trying to achieve and what it
Hmm.
does to meet its governance objectives.
Hmm.
And in practice, that turns out to be a fuzzy mess.
Welcome to Secure and Simple podcast. In this podcast, we demystify cybersecurity governance, compliance with various standards and regulations, and other topics that are of interest for consultants, CISOs, and other cybersecurity professionals. Hello, I'm Dejan Kosutic, the CEO at Advisera and the host of Secure and Simple podcast. Today, my guest is George Kesteven, and he's the CEO at Frontex from Australia, and is one of the leading experts for corporate governance management systems. Now, he has over 40 years of experience in management consulting, and he has clients almost all over the world. So, in Australia, North and Central America, and Europe. And he's focused on knowledge management and documentation that supports governance activities of his clients. So, in today's podcast, you'll learn what is governance, why is it important, and how to use it for various ISO standards. And especially, we'll focus on this standard ISO 37000, which is basically a standard around governance. So, welcome to the show George.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here. So, George, why did you actually choose to focus on governance as one of your main, let's say, activities in the consulting?
Okay, my work has been based on the observation that in most organizations, the documentation is awful.
Hmm.
As a result of that, the governance and compliance activities are at risk. They're challenged because governance compliance rely on good definitions of what the organization is trying to achieve and what it
Hmm.
does to meet its governance objectives.
Hmm.
And in practice, that turns out to be a fuzzy mess that
Yeah,
typically you go into an
unfortunately, yes.
organization. Yeah. Most organizations, their documentation is, as one of my clients described it, a fetid swamp of dead documents. Um, and this puts the organization at risk and it puts the directors and officers personally at risk. Increasingly, there's personal liability for
Hmm.
directors and officers. They are expected to oversee what the organization does. They're expected to be able to substantiate that the organization is meeting its obligations.
Hmm.
And with lousy knowledge management, in a lot of organizations, they don't even know what those obligations are, let
Hmm.
alone what the organization has in place to meet those obligations.
Okay, and if I understood well, with let's say a better governance and with better documentation, the companies will, let's say, handle whatever their processes there are. Is this the point here?
There are several points, but yes, that clearly is a key one.
Hmm.
There's also the very obvious point that compliance failures are can be catastrophic for an organization.
Hmm.
You will have heard, I'm sure, the safety consultants
Hmm.
have a mantra that if you think safety is expensive, just try having an accident. It is very much the same with governance and compliance,
Hmm.
that if you fail to meet a compliance requirement, it can be catastrophic for your organization. And in practice, doing it well is less effort than doing it badly.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, just as
Okay.
a simple, sorry, go on.
Yes. So, just to kind of continue on this topic, I noticed that you mentioned in your LinkedIn profile this corporate governance management system. So, can you explain what this actually is?
Okay, our core proposition is that trying to manage corporate knowledge, that is
Mm-hmm.
the policies, procedures, and everything else that you ought to be writing down about how your organization is functioning,
Mm-hmm.
trying to manage that body of knowledge as a collection of separate documents, which is the
Mm-hmm.
way essentially everybody does it, is doomed to failure. It
Mm-hmm.
just cannot work in a live organization. There is too much going on, and no individual manager is in a position to maintain that body of knowledge as a whole. So, what we're calling corporate governance management systems
Mm-hmm.
is a methodology for managing that body of knowledge as a single integrated body of knowledge.
Okay.
In place of documents, you have, in effect, a database of pages. But the
Mm-hmm.
idea is that you put everything in one place and you are mapping your obligations and your compliance requirements to the things that are actually going on in the organization to
Mm-hmm.
meet those requirements.
Okay. Now you mentioned that this is body of knowledge. Now, typically people think of body of knowledge, let's say knowledge bases and similar, whereas they think of policies and procedures as basically internal rules, not really body of knowledge. So, why do you actually consider these internal rules as a body of knowledge?
Because it's the accumulated wisdom of the organization that all of the things that you've got in your policies and procedures are the outcome of management thinking and management decisions. That the organization will have an objective. We need to be
Mm-hmm.
safe, we need to be sustainable, we need to meet quality objectives, and so on. And for each one of those objectives, the organization people have had to sit down and think about it. How are we going to do it? And they build their knowledge of that.
Mm-hmm.
They record it in the form of policy and procedure statements, and they have
Mm-hmm.
to communicate it to people.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, none of your policies, procedures, things like that mean anything unless you can actually show that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
information has made it to the people that need it. So,
Mm-hmm.
what we refer to as knowledge means that collective know-how, knowing how the organization is intended to function,
Mm-hmm.
and protecting that know-how as people move on, people leave, new person, systems change, and so on. And that should be a continuing aggregation of wisdom, not
Okay.
a depreciating library of documents that go out of date.
This is certainly an interesting approach to documentation, and we'll come to this later. But let me first ask you, how is this governance, let's say, management system related to ISO 37000? And what is ISO 37000 in the first place?
Okay. ISO 37000 is a set of guidelines. It's not a certification standard
Mm-hmm.
that it was written, directed at governing bodies, boards of directors, to provide a top level view of what it means to say that an organization is well governed.
Mm-hmm.
It sets out a set of principles that the organization should meet.
Okay.
There are two categories. They are the things the organization ought to have in place so that it is capable of meeting its objectives, and then things it ought to have in place to show that it actually does meet its objectives.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of what are the principles, the main principles of in the standard?
Okay, the governing body, it should be competent to
Mm-hmm.
meet to meet its obligations. Okay, I mean that is one of them. It should be sufficiently equipped to meet its
Mm-hmm.
obligations. It should have systems in place to make sure that stakeholder concerns are taken into account in its decision making.
Mm-hmm.
That it should be able to show that its decision making is based on data,
Mm-hmm.
that it that managers who have governance responsibilities need to be able to distinguish between their governance activities and their management activities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that the delegation from the governing body to personnel within the organization needs to be well defined.
Mm-hmm.
That these are all really fairly obvious things. The point of the standard is just that it spells them out in a consistent way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's also important to note that the standard itself says that not every organization needs to achieve optimum performance on every one of these. You need to
Mm-hmm.
consider to what extent are they actually relevant to what your
Uh-huh.
organization is doing.
Uh-huh.
Um,
And typically, which kind of organizations do you find the most suitable actually to implement these principles, these guidelines? So is it larger organizations, I don't know, public organizations, governments, or private, smaller?
well, the standard is useful for any organization that has a board of directors.
Uh-huh.
Okay, um, it's the sort of thing that even I mean, a system that we set up fairly recently was for quite a small not-for-profit
Mm-hmm.
organization, and for them it is useful just as a discussion point that are we as a group doing everything we ought to be doing to make sure that this organization is behaving properly, that it is sustainable, that it will continue to work well, even when members of the board of governors move on, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
In their case, they don't need to go very much further than that. But the larger and more complex the organisation, the more value there is
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
working through each of these elements in detail, at
Mm-hmm.
least some level of detail,
Okay.
in part because it identifies gaps in the management system as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Okay. Do you maybe know, if let's say there is this Fortune 500, let's say in US, are most of these companies actually implementing these principles?
They will all be implementing at least some of these principles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if every organisation where the board of directors is thinking about its own activities will
Mm-hmm.
be, in fact, doing some of these. The
Okay.
idea of ISO 37000 is just to establish a consistency as to how they do it,
Mm-hmm.
and a consistent terminology. ISO 37000 is coupled with ISO 37004,
Uh-huh.
which is simply a way of measuring the extent to which an organization complies with 37,000.
Uh-huh.
And I think the long-term objective is that organizations will start to report the extent of their governance maturity using
Mm-hmm.
these two. I'm not aware of anyone much doing it yet,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it will come.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. There is this ISO 27004, which is also about measurement, objectives and measurement of security, management security, right? So it's interesting
Yeah.
actually. The numbering is also following here. Are there any other standards related to 37,000 that are important?
Uh, well, there are any number of standards that are relevant sort of for the next level down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 37,000 is very much the top level. It's saying that
Mm-hmm.
if you're the board of governors, here's how you view your governance system as a whole.
Okay.
And then for each of those elements, you may choose to use some of the more detailed
Yeah, but
standards.
because you mentioned this 37,004, is there 37,005 or something like this?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and just to clarify here, there is also this standard 37,001, which is anti-bribery, but it's, from what I understood, not related to at least not directly related to 37,000.
Well, um, it's not directly related, but 37,000, one of the principles is that you have to ensure that your organization's behavior is ethical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the organization might well decide that to implement that, to meet that requirement, it will choose to comply with 37,001
Mm-hmm.
as part of what it does to ensure
Uh-huh.
ethical behavior.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this numbering is a little bit confusing because it's
Yeah,
the
I,
same.
I, I
It's
agree. Yeah.
unfortunately, but okay. Okay, so how can actually consultants or I would say, and actually before I go into this, another question, you mentioned that there is a distinction between governance and management, right? So can you please explain this? What is then governance and how is this different from management?
Okay, what the standard has in mind there, I think, I wasn't party to the writing of it, so
Hmm.
is that supposing the organization says we're going to comply with such and such a standard,
Hmm.
okay? The organization's managers are responsible for the day to day activity of the organization, but
Hmm.
separately, they may be required to step back and report to the board on instances of compliance failure, of policy failure.
Hmm.
It's that kind of distinction. I mean, ISO 37,000 at a high level, you are expecting people to be reporting to the board on your your governance activities.
Okay.
Now, that's not directly related to your management activities.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, because very often this term governance is not only seen as something that is related to the board, but also something that is related to, well, management in some cases. For example, there is this IT governance concept, right? There is a standard called 38,500, I think, which speaks about IT governance. And it's basically really about IT processes on this lower, I would say, managerial
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, this is very much the case, and indeed, this was part of what led to the development of our methodology and our governance management system is a
Hmm.
way to pull together these various elements.
Uh-huh.
You're absolutely right. The word governance is thrown around a lot with
Hmm.
quite a few very different meanings.
Hmm.
And part of the problem, and indeed this is what we are aiming to address as consultants,
Hmm.
is that where you talk about board level activities, the guidelines all say that the directors have to oversee what's going on, exercise oversight, all of
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. What is very difficult for them at present in most organizations is knowing what they can actually look at.
Hmm.
Okay, back to my original point about lousy documentation.
Hmm.
And a great deal of what is going on within organizations also falls under the heading of governance, as you just mentioned, with IT,
Yeah, yeah.
a heap in financial services as well, and all the know your customer regulations and the anti-money laundering stuff and so on.
Hmm.
We,
Yeah.
in practice, try to just stay away from the word governance in a sense for exactly this reason.
Okay,
And it's
but
all about
can we
making
then,
organizations work well.
yeah, can we then conclude that, let's say, corporate governance is something that is related to the board of companies, whereas governance can be used also in terms of, let's say, managing management on more, let's say, day-to-day level.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. Unfortunately, you run into complications even with that, that
Ah,
corporate governance in some circles is taken to mean is the company going to rip off its shareholders?
ah,
Is there sovereign risk, or all that kind of stuff? Um, that also
okay,
gets called corporate governance.
good. Now, let's get into a more practical, let's say, thing. So the most of, let's say, our audience is really dealing with, various frameworks, standards like 27001, NIS 2, DORA, ISO 9001, SOC 2, and similar. So, how can ISO 37000, help consultants or professionals dealing with these other standards? How can it help them?
Okay, its value is when you take a step back and say, is this organization actually doing all the things it should be doing?
Hmm.
Okay. If you're focused on any one of those individual standards that you just mentioned, then ISO 37,000 doesn't help you. It's the other way around. That if you say, okay, here's an organization what is it currently doing?
Okay.
Right? Can anyone put hand on heart and say this organization is aware of its obligations and is it doing everything it should to meet them? But that first
Mm-hmm.
question, is it aware of its obligations? Now, those may be regulatory obligations, or they may be management system standards that the organization ought to be dealing with for commercial reasons, for social license to operate reasons, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And ISO 37000 is just a starting point for looking at the organization, saying, is it actually doing everything it should be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Is the board in a position to be governing this organization at all? If you're a
Okay.
consultant working within the organization, you never see the board members, and you're focused on one specific area, then I would say ISO 37000 isn't
Okay.
really going to help you.
But okay, if, as you were saying, if 37,000 is not useful for example, for ISO 27001, it's if I understood well, it's the other way around. Then how is it useful for consultants? I mean,
Well, there are a lot
how
of
is ISO 37,000 useful for consultants?
okay. There is quite a demand for boards who want assistance in formulating their roles and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right at the top level. Um, it is not uncommon, particularly if you get into smaller organizations and not for profits,
Mm-hmm.
where the directors don't come from with a history of corporate management.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and those kind of boards quite often are looking for consultants to help them formulate a big picture of what they as a group should be doing and what they should be looking at when they look at their organization to establish that the organization is behaving as it should.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
it's very
Uh,
much a big picture. Yeah,
Yeah, okay, it makes sense. So from what I see, this ISO 37000 and this governance in general, it could be kind of, let's say, an upsell for consultants that are already working with companies, right? If they already implement, I don't know,
oh
DORA
yeah,
or NIS2 or SOC 2, if they're already, I would say, in good terms with the senior management, they can actually offer this as a second project where they can actually help them with this general level governance thing, right?
yeah. No, I
Mm-hmm.
agree entirely that it is a common failing in organizations that they don't even have a register of their compliance requirements.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in there as a consultant providing services in relation to one particular requirement,
Mm-hmm.
you can at some point step back and say, okay, well, this is one of a list. Show me the rest of the list. And they will say, well, we don't know what should be on it. And you then say, well, let's work our way through ISO 37000
Mm-hmm.
and think about it.
Okay. Now let's go back to lousy documentation. uh, from my experience, companies typically do not look at this documentation as a body of knowledge or, let's say, best practices. They simply see it as something that needs to be done, and in most cases, something that they don't do very willingly, right? They're
Yeah.
usually seeing this as overhead. So, can you explain a little bit this concept actually of how to turn this thinking that actually that documentation is basically your best knowledge, your best practices, and that this is something good for a company?
Right. Well, just to step back a little when I'm talking about lousy documentation, a metric that we have found, if you take an organization that has been running for more than 5 years or so, and you get their current collection of documents
Mm-hmm.
and actually work through it, you'll be the first person in history that's ever looked at them all. We find that on average, 65% of the pages are obsolete or duplicated
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
irrelevant.
Yeah.
Okay. Which means that the amount of work the organization is doing to audit, for induction and training, onboarding, all of that is burdened with all of this extra dead documents.
Yeah.
And it's also an enormous value. I was with a client just a week ago, and we just did a quick tally of how many dead documents they have in their system and
Mm-hmm.
made an estimate of how much management time went into creating those. Okay. And it means they're sitting there currently, on our estimate, with $7.5 million worth, in Australian dollars, of dead documents. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
the concept that we have approached is to say, okay, we're not focused on documents, but on what's in the documents. And this is really what we mean by knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's a piece of information. It's a policy statement or it's a procedure or whatever it is. For that piece of information, who is accountable for what it says, which also in practice means who has authority to change it and issue a new
Mm-hmm.
version. How does it relate to other pieces of information in the system? So
Mm-hmm.
if it's a procedure, it belongs on someone's position description. If it implements a policy or more than one policy,
Mm-hmm.
then there has to be a link between that policy and this piece of information.
Mm-hmm.
For which employees is it required knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
That is, this is something they need to know before they can even start work, like the code
Mm-hmm.
of conduct or in industrial situations, anything to do with safety, that sort of stuff. And then who are the people that need to access to it? They don't need to know it, but they may need to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that means they also need to be told when it changes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of that that's what we mean by the knowledge management. And in this day and age, all of that can in fact be automated. Okay, so the idea is that managers, if they're designing a procedure or writing a policy or whatever that they do, they shouldn't be spending any time at all on documents.
Mm-hmm.
They should be thinking about how do we do this better? And that's
Okay.
that's
So you're saying that what the managers should not be spending time on writing documents, or can you explain this?
they should be okay. Managers should be designing better procedures,
Mm-hmm.
okay, or writing policies.
Okay.
They shouldn't be bogged down in the detail of creating documents. Okay, they're creating content, and everything else should happen behind the scenes.
Okay.
To give you
Uh,
the sort of thing that, sorry, go on. You're about to
no,
ask.
no. Okay. If you can give me an example here, just for me to understand better this distinction between
Okay,
and mhm.
well, supposing you've got a bit of your organization and there's a procedure that isn't working properly.
Mhm.
Okay, bad things are happening. So currently, typically what happens is you get the team together, you sit down in a room, you decide what changes you're going to make, and you go out and you implement those changes, and then some months later, you'll get around to updating the document.
Mhm.
Okay?
Okay.
The way we do it, we have the team together in the room, we put the procedure up on screen
Mhm.
because everything we do is online,
Okay.
and we make the change there and then on screen,
Mhm.
saying this is what our new procedure is going to be.
Mhm.
And we say, yeah, okay, do it. And the documentation is updated at that point. There's no delay, and no one has done anything with documents at all. And there are no documents in our system. Um,
Mhm. So you're saying that the managers should update the documents basically on the go without any formal approvals, or what?
no, no. Okay, now two things. First, they're not updating documents at all. They're updating
Mm.
procedures.
Okay.
Okay, these are just pages in our system.
Mhm.
The approval is, well, obviously you have a structure as to who can approve what.
Mhm.
And I mean, the example I just gave assumed that the person with approval authority is in the room. If they're
Mhm.
not in the room, then they ought to be. But if they're not, then you forward the proposal to
Mhm.
the person who can approve it.
Okay. Now, are you saying that procedures are not documents? Just for me to do, because I use the words documents, and by documents I mean policies, procedures, plans, these kind of things.
Okay,
And
this is the conceptual change that
uh-huh.
trying to get across here.
Hmm.
The way we do it, we have a system of individual pages. We have no
Hmm.
documents.
Okay.
And so if you have a procedure, it is a page in a
Hmm.
system. It is in that sense a document in that it's words,
Yeah,
on a
yeah.
screen, but it isn't, we're not mucking around with Word documents or PDFs or anything
Aha, so
like
you're
that.
saying that technically it's much easier to change the text of a particular policy or procedure because you don't have to really create a new document in Word or something like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. Okay.
Partly it's easier for that reason. It's also easier because with the information compartmentalized and broken down into very small units,
Hmm.
you can just go and change this procedure. So, we're changing the order of the steps, things like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it is just a single page, not
Hmm.
20 pages of stuff that needs to be
Okay.
edited.
Now, going back to the concept of knowledge and documents, so typically people think of knowledge of something that is rather unstructured and something that provides, let's say, a guidance, not so much something that is mandatory, right? Whereas policies and procedures are something that is very structured and it's mandatory. So, how do you kind of reconcile these two concepts and
Okay, I don't have any problem with the concept of structured knowledge.
Mhm.
Okay, that for us, we've got the organization as a whole and its board of governors' intentions for how that organization should function.
Mhm.
And that body of knowledge is then quite clearly structured.
Mhm.
Um, we normally take an approach first, just what is define the organization, which in anything other than a small business is often
Mhm.
surprisingly challenging. Then, what are its governance objectives? And then below that, what policies do we have in place to support those governance objectives?
Mhm.
What procedures do we have in place? So we set up a structure of knowledge in which each of these elements has a defined place. This perhaps the word knowledge is causing an issue here, but yeah, we certainly have not had any pushback to
Mhm.
date
Oh,
on
great.
this aspect.
Mhm. Okay, very good. So basically, let's go back to the topic of 37,000. So if a consultant wants to kind of move into this area, so what would you suggest? Where to start with ISO 37,000?
Okay, the starting point um, might be the board of directors wanting
Hmm.
guidance on the organization as a whole, as we talked about,
Hmm.
or it might be if the consultant is already in the organization dealing with a specific area.
Hmm.
The next step for them is to take a broader view of the organization
Uh-huh.
and look at the 18 elements of 37,000 and perhaps create a report saying, okay, the organization, I mean, the first maturity rating in 37,004 is the organization aware of this
Hmm.
principle at all? Um, and the consultants might well be able to come back with a very short, simple report for the organization, the senior
Hmm.
personnel,
Okay.
saying, here are some holes in your governance system. Here are some significant gaps.
Hmm.
And I would like to suggest a project to fill them.
Hmm. Okay.
Um,
So basically, go with some kind of a gap analysis, and then after that, based on these gaps, propose a project for the implementation, right?
yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Okay, great.
The standard was written with that in mind, indeed.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, great. Are there, let's say, the some laws or regulations in Australia or I don't know Europe or North America which, let's say, specify corporate governance? And if yes, how is then 37,000 useful for these kind of use cases? I mean, for compliance with these kind of regulations.
Um, Okay, 37,000 says that the board of directors needs to make sure that the organization is meeting its compliance
Mm-hmm.
obligations.
Okay.
Okay, it is at that point that laws come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to say to the board of directors, are you aware of all the legal requirements that the organization actually has to do things to comply with?
Mm-hmm.
And if you really want to get them moving as consultants, you say, are you aware of which of these have personal liability for
Mm-hmm.
directors and officers? I mean, in Australia, there's now the offence of industrial manslaughter, where if someone is killed in the workplace as a
Mm-hmm.
result of management failure, then directors and officers can go to jail.
Mm. Okay.
Okay. And one of the elements of 37,000 says, are you aware of your compliance obligations? And are you
Mm-hmm.
making sure that your organization is meeting them? Um,
Okay. Okay. Understood. And if a consultant is completely new in 37,000, so besides purchasing the standard, are there some courses available or some other, let's say, learning materials to go in this direction?
um, I'm not sure. Um, we're certainly working on building elements on the Frontex website that
Mm-hmm.
address exactly this. Um, Most of the consulting work that is currently going on around 37,000, as far as I can tell, is from consultants that want to offer high level board of directors assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where I think there is an opportunity, and this is obviously the direction of my own consulting work, is the next level down, what the organization actually does to meet all these requirements, and
Mm-hmm.
in doing so, what documentation does it have?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay, great. Now you mentioned also this, if I understood well, 37,004 is about what measurement of governance, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
how do you actually measure if a company is well governed?
okay. The way 37,004 um, proposes it, you
Mm-hmm.
work your way through the 18 elements,
Uh-huh.
and for each element, you give three scores, 0
Uh-huh.
to 5. Okay, 0 meaning nothing in place, through to 5, it's optimized with continuous
Uh-huh. It's kind
improvement and
of a
so on.
maturity scale, right?
Yeah, very much so. And
Mm-hmm.
what you're looking at first is in relation to each of these principles, the organization's behavior, as in, does it acknowledge this requirement at all? If
Mm-hmm.
so, has it made a statement about it? Has it promulgated that statement? Has it developed procedures and so on? Then the effectiveness of what you've done,
Mm-hmm.
as in, are your procedures implemented? Are people trained in them and so on? And then the efficiency of those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for each principle, you come up with these three scores. Then the rating for the principle as a whole is the mean of those three rounded down,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. Um,
No, great. It sounds like a very good and very precise tool for measurement. And actually, it comes to my mind that it can also be used as a gap analysis, right? For doing this initial gap analysis and see where the company is lacking, right?
oh yeah, and in fact, the standard actually proposes that for each element you will set short and long term targets,
Ah, uh-huh.
improvement targets, um, and they also make the point that you don't need to be aiming for a perfect score on every element. That for
Mm-hmm.
some organizations you can quite reasonably decide that we don't need the principle at all, or we don't need to go very far with it. Um,
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. It sounds like a very useful standard. Okay, another question on a different topic. So very often there is this ESG like concept, like the environmental, social, and governance. So is this standard? I mean, 37,000, let's say, useful for companies that go for this ESG, environmental, social, and governance?
uh, Certainly it should be, and the standard was written with that in mind.
Uh-huh.
this comes back in part to the fuzziness around the word governance. Okay, that governance in the ESG concept is a lesser thing than corporate governance in the 37,000 sense, because from 37,000's point of view, environment and sustainability are components. I mean, they are principles within 37,000. Nonetheless, they all touch on this same basic issue. Can we define what we mean when we say our organization is well governed? And can we prove it? Okay. They all, in a sense, come back to that.
Okay, good. Okay, so good. Then let's wrap up the call. And what would you suggest to consultants when thinking about ISO 37000 or governance? What should they focus on, and what they should take the most care about?
Well, they need to be precise with their definitions. Okay, when they start talking to the organization, start talking to directors and officers, they will find that there is this same confusion about what the word governance means. And it can be useful to just spell out quite precisely. Okay, this gap analysis, as you put it, is certainly a very good way to start. Make sure you don't try to do everything all at once. I mean, clearly it is in anything other than a small business, it is a very large can of worms that you're opening. But it is valuable to an organization to get this right. It does, in fact, reduce the total amount of work that its managers have to do once they understand what it is you're on about. Okay, doing things well, doing things consistent with all the standards and compliance requirements and so on is actually less work once you've set up the systems to do it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you for these insights, George, and I learned a lot today about governance and especially about 37,000. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. So just to mention that I also did an interview, a podcast episode, two episodes before around how to handle documents. So this was an interview with Carlos Cruz, and you can also take a look at these episodes if you're interested in writing policies and procedures. And this was it for today. Thank you everyone for listening or watching this podcast, and see you again in 2 weeks' time in our new episode of Secure and Simple podcast. Thanks for making it this far in today's episode of Secure and Simple podcast. Here's some useful info for consultants and other professionals who do cybersecurity governance and compliance for a living. On Advisera website, you can check out various tools that can help your business. For example, Conformio software enables you to streamline and scale ISO 27001 implementation and maintenance for your clients. White label documentation toolkits for NIS2, DORA, ISO 27001 and other ISO standards enable you to create all the required documents for your clients. Accredited lead auditor and lead implementer courses for various standards and frameworks enable you to show your expertise to potential clients. And a learning management system called Company Training Academy with numerous videos for NIS2, DORA, ISO 27001 and other frameworks enable you to organize training and awareness programs for your clients' workforce. Check out the links in the description below for more information. If you like this podcast, please give it a thumbs up. It helps us with better ranking, and I would also appreciate if you share it with your colleagues. That's it for today. Stay safe.